All right, I don't know if the order matters, but I'm gonna go with the order. So the first person that's gonna speak is Cathy Clifford.
Thank you. I want to just begin by thanking all of you and commending the leadership of the Coalition of Concerned Catholics for calling us together for these days. And I think this is so important, and this is not the only place in the world right now where there's a bit of impatience around the implementation of the Synod. And some of you might be aware that in Great Britain, there's also a group of lay Catholics who's written a letter to their bishops to say, like, can we get on with it? So this, you and this meeting are a great encouragement to those of us who've been involved sort of in the long haul in the synodal process. And the energy here, I'd love to bottle it up and spread it around. And I hope you take this experience back to your parishes. And I know many people here are involved at the diocesan level. This is really, I know you will take this back, and I know we're all learning as we journey together. So this gives me great hope. Listening also this morning to the summary, that would be our sort of final report, the issues that have emerged here in our conversations. It's really striking to see the parallels between what we heard in the long synodal process in the global Catholic Church. The same issues that we've heard from Catholics in every continent, and that we faced in the Synodal Assembly in the gatherings in the fall of 2023 and 24. And the recommendations and proposals really echo what is in the final document. And I see this as what we call, if you follow the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola, after we make a discernment and we take a decision, we sit with it for a while. And we need to pray with it again. And we await God's confirmation. The Spirit will confirm the decisions we've made. And I think this is a confirmation of the long synodal process and the work that has given rise to the final document and its orientations. So I see this as the work of the Spirit continuing among us. And I trust that the Spirit will continue to bear us all forward. But I hope this experience has helped all of you to understand we have a great deal of work ahead of us. That implementation of the Synod is also a long process, and it will take all of us. Todos, todos, todos. So I just want to, again, thank you and wish all of you well, and say we should all go forth strengthened in God's Spirit, and as those pilgrims of hope that we're trying to become in this Jubilee year. So thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. Linda Staudt.
Thank you. I want to re-echo what Cathy just said. What this has meant for me is hope, and also it reaffirmed that the time that we spent in Rome, we got it right. Because literally we worked through around 5 different drafts. Now you're thinking, like, really, who does that? Because it could have ended a lot earlier than it did, but the church kept on listening, and that was a big takeaway for me. And the other that I'm left with right now is so very impressed with each of you in terms of, you've taken now 3 days away from your lives, from your families, to be here. Some of you, in your roles in your diocese, in your parishes, have come now to learn more. Others are literally the lay folks in the pews who want to learn more. And one of the first things that we say in the document that Pope Francis shared is that it began at the local level and it now has returned to the local level. So I was just so encouraged to see the numbers of you that came and all the different work that you're doing, lay, ordained, consecrated. It was wonderful. It reaffirmed for me the importance of silence. And the big takeaway that I saw again repeated in the conversation of the Spirit. So we have silence in the prayer, and we've gone very accustomed to that. My biggest takeaway from Rome, and if I were still a director of education, is how do we now put that silence and that reflection in our work lives? And really the conversation of the Spirit is asking us and gives us the methodology to do that. I would have transformed how I ran meetings, from versus the debating going across really to that attentive listening. And I saw that in each of you, and by the end, we all became better listeners. And I have become a student of synodality, and you are becoming students of synodality. Those of us here just have had perhaps a bit more of a unique experience, but our hope is that it has inspired each of you. The other that I said right at the beginning when I introduced the retreat, and what Father Timothy, now Cardinal Timothy, shared with us is the friendship, and how we saw that through this process emerge from Sunday evening today. And the line that he shared with us is so true. Effective collegiality precedes effective collegiality. We needed to become friends, and through this process we have, and the results show. In my work that I have done, I'm an educator, now retired, who said to my bishop when I retired, "Is there anything you need?" Well, this is where I've landed. And the gift is I have one foot in the parish and the diocese and the other foot in education. So what I want to share with you and what I heard is that apply this to your work lives. I am now working with, in a lot of cases, here in the Diocese of Hamilton, with pastors and with principals. How do we work together, more synodally listening to each other, so that we can support the faith formation of our students? And that for me has just been so wonderful and inspiring. And reiterating too that what I heard and I was part of helping with the summary, although we left Gary with a bit of work in the evening. But the line that Pope Francis shared with us right at the ecumenical vigil, his message of totus, 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 but what he said is there is space for everyone. And when there isn't, please, let us work so that there is. And what I heard from the reflection is that willingness to make space so that everyone is included. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Father Pierre.
Throughout the last few days, I took note of a few things that I heard, and I just jotted down some quotes, and three that come out. Silence is centrifugal, and then win an argument, lose a friend. And finally, this was in a private conversation, the mind can only absorb for as long as the ass can endure. I want to make a confession and a apology to the organizing committee who did such a wonderful job with organizing this event, and that is because at some point along the way I doubted you. And about 3 months ago I said to my colleagues, don't buy your flight tickets yet because I'm not sure this thing's going to get off the ground. But it did, and impressively so. And one of my big takeaways after last night, the conversations I had with people, as I kept saying, it's not over. It's clearly not over. It's not over in the sense of the big picture, because I was very impressed with Catherine and Bishop Alan Faubert's discourse last night in talking about the bigger picture and how the process is continuing on the global perspective. But just the fact that this many people showed up and paid to be here, many traveled long distances to be here, is a sign that we're not letting this die. We are continuing this. We are the church. We are continuing this, and we have decided that this is not over. That is a very encouraging thing for me. And I want us to suggest that we remind ourselves that if we feel like we are peripheral in the church, if we feel that we are peripheral Catholics, good. Because that is where the church is, that is where the church is meant to be. So, continue. And finally, this is the thing I think that this wasn't mentioned at all, this word wasn't mentioned, so it didn't come up very much, if at all, this week, but it's the word facilitate. We often hear and express the want for leadership, but perhaps more precisely what we're looking for and what the world needs, what the church needs, is facilitation. We need facilitators. Facilitators of dialogue, facilitators of friendship, facilitators of synodality, and therefore builders of bridges rather than walls. And so this is my big takeaway, and I would also suggest to you on that note that in a concrete way, the way we can be facilitators of a synodal church is to take the practice of spiritual conversations forward with us. It's a very accessible process, and once you've done it, you know how to facilitate it. So we all belong to other communities where we could use it and where we can use our skills to gather people and continue to further the synodal church. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Raymond.
Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you, Pierre, for setting up my opening remark, which is in praise of facilitators. There were 17 people who were either volunteered or voluntold, invited to share in that role. So I'd like to begin by saying a very special thank you to each of them. You had every right to come here as a delegate and just enjoy being at the table and not carry extra responsibility. But of the 20 people who were requested, 17 said yes. And for me, that was a sign. It was sort of like the opposite proportion of what I usually get when I try to get people involved in synodal process in my home diocese. So I knew I was dealing with a group of people today, or this week, who were committed lay Catholics, concerned lay Catholics, as we discovered in prayer, contemplative lay Catholics, convicted lay Catholics, and you can fill in whatever C adjective you want after that. Conversational lay Catholics for sure. I'm going to begin and end my remarks with a quote from the final document. Number 28 is perhaps the most quoted paragraph. What unites the different expressions of synodality is the church gathering together to dialogue, to discern, and to decide. And this is a constitutive dimension of the church, a path of spiritual renewal and structural reform that enables us to become more participatory and missionary, to walk with every person and radiate the life and light of Christ. What I've experienced this week is that being lived out in practice. Many will feel that we don't have a lot of power or a lot of authority to make any kinds of decisions, but we certainly have gathered, we certainly have dialogued, and we certainly have discerned. And in the summary that Gary just presented for us, we hear echoes of things that have been said throughout the world and right here in Canada in the preparatory phases of the Synod. We heard it in the initial consultations back in 21-22. We heard it in the national synthesis. We heard it also in the work that Concerned Lay Catholics did across the country in their consultations. And we saw echoes of that as we worked through the worksheets at the table conversation. And I'd like to say a special thank you to all of you who took part with openness, with vulnerability, and with parousia, that bold courage of speaking the truth of the gospel in a way that is open and in a way that is respectful. Because although we were certainly benefited from the beautiful times of prayer, and very special thanks to those who organized and helped us pray each day, we certainly experienced it in the witness given by the speakers. It gave shape to our conversations at the tables. But really what makes synodality work most powerfully is the participation of each person and the belief and conviction that when you're gathered in a table, every voice matters, each experience matters, because it contributes to the fuller expression and understanding of what it means to be the church. And I think that as we gather today, as we ponder next steps, what will the next step of the journey lead us to, we're going to have a special opportunity to bring it home. You know, it's perhaps easy to be synodal in a context like this, where everybody is basically friendly and everybody is basically open to the vision, and we need those moments, don't we? This is why we go to conferences, this is why we go to events and retreats, to be nourished and to be supported with and renewed in our commitment to a vision that is sometimes difficult. As Pierre just said, you know, there's something about being a synodal Catholic that does mean being a little bit on the edge, maybe asking the more difficult questions that a lot of people would rather not ask. And yet, here we are. So I'd like to say, I was certainly very much moved by the retreat, by the liturgies, as Linda mentioned, by the silence, that we needed to give our time to those moments of silence, just to let the Spirit seep in, and to really ask us to not only hear what the person was saying, but what the Spirit was saying through that person, whether it was one of the speakers, whether it was someone at our table, whether it was someone we were sharing a meal or a walk with. In conclusion, my hope for the Synod, it gets back to something that Bishop Alain and Cathy spoke about in their conversation yesterday, when Bishop Alain made reference to paragraph 94. The resolute implementation of authentic synodal decision-making processes will further the progress of God's people in a participatory way. Without concrete changes in the short term, the vision of a synodal church will not be credible, and this may alienate those members of the people of God who have drawn strength and hope from the synodal journey. Local churches need to find ways to implement these changes. It's pretty tough language, and I guess we would make a mistake if we went home quoting paragraph 94 and saying, change. I'm sure you've all seen that famous Far Side cartoon where the first panel is, who wants things to change? And everybody puts their hand up. And then, who wants to change? And the hands go back down. In a certain sense, I think what unites us here is a belief that change doesn't have to be a scary thing. It doesn't have to be something that we have to avoid at all costs. Change can be difficult, but change can be transformative. Change can be a sign of conversion. It can be a sign of a deeper commitment to become more fully who we already are as the people of God and the body of Christ. So my prayer for each of us as we go home is that we go home committed to that vision of change, but also with patience and perseverance. Because I was also struck by those words last night of how synodal reform is not something that we necessarily impose from on high, but we nurture from the grassroots. And we've all come from our different grassroots to be together and to be part of a movement of positive change and transformation. May it continue.
And by engaging with people of all backgrounds, confidently as Catholics who understand the gospel message, to reach out to everyone, not just to preach to the converted. I think it's a very important part of that. So thanks to all of you. I also want to offer very briefly thanks to both Cathy and Gary for their remarkable leadership. I met with Cathy early on, and Cathy and Michael actually, for a few lunches to talk about this. And Cathy just has this way of moving forwards, very humbly but very clearly knowing the direction she wants to go in. We call that vision, and she had a remarkable vision for this. And while I understand, Pierre, that you had some reservations about whether this was ever going to happen, I didn't sense that in my conversations with Cathy at all. She just kept moving this ship forwards, and that's where it went. I also want to very briefly offer thanks to Bishop Crosby. This may be one of the last times publicly I have to thank him for his support, not only of this event, but of St. Jerome's University. When I came to him with this idea, he had no hesitation about receiving it and just wanted to know more. He met with Cathy and Gary. He's been a wonderful supporter, not only of this event that he's going to celebrate with us shortly, but also of this university and its Catholic mission. So thank you so much, Bishop Crosby, for everything that you've done for St. Jerome. So I'm just going to tie my last comment, which is an observation on things that I heard and experienced these last few days with a bit of vainglorious self-promotion for St. Jerome's and what we do. One of the conversations that I heard a lot from people, and I think it's a conclusion that we came to after some discernment and discussion of some of the serious topics that we've been reviewing, is the importance of formation of lay people. We talked a little bit last night about the importance of how the synod is going to be received, and I know as an historian, the importance of how the teachings of the Second Vatican Council were received in the years after 1965 had a very strong impact on the direction its teachings would take in the church. But that idea of formation, to me, is not an exclusive thing of the Catholic University, but it's something that I think about all the time. And so in a way, to try and understand what our role might be in that, St. Jerome's last year began a program of continuing education. We call it the Certificate in Catholic Leadership, and I'd be happy to share more information about it with you later on. But in short, with the very strong support of Bishop Crosby, but also many of the other leaders in the different areas of apostolic activity in the diocese, we are taking in people, some of you are in this room right now, for a one-year experience that involves education, service, spiritual formation, a retreat component, a capstone project that goes back into your area of activity, hopefully with an enriched experience of what it means to be in the church and to think with the church moving forward. So I think that's at the root of what lay formation should be all about. So I offer that to you, happy to talk to you about it afterwards, but please accept my gratitude for being here, and I look forward to seeing the seeds that were planted here today scattered throughout the country. Thanks so much.
And privileged to be last, since we know what Jesus said about people who are last, is Michael.
One of the things that I've been struck by is how bad I am at this. And what I mean is, yesterday I spoke theoretically about Pope Francis and hope, and that wonderful line that we do not hope alone. This is a perfect example of why that's the case. Then I realized that it's one thing to talk theoretically. It's another thing to talk experientially and personally. And what this synodal experience has been for me is a reminder, kind of a laboratory of correction, that I don't actually do this very well. And as Matthew, our group leader for Table 10, will know, that punctuated between the silence and the reverence of the other and the deep listening is my personal proclivity just to talk of. And I realized, I'm not getting this. I write books and chapters about synodality, but I'm actually not incarnating it. And I was reminded of a similar situation many years ago in the early 1990s, I wrote a book with a former president of the university, Doug Letson, called The Jesuit Mystique. And one of the chapters I wrote in that book was on the spiritual tradition, the Ignatian spiritual tradition. And many Jesuit spiritual directors and others would say, well, they never read such a brilliant distillation of the process. It must have been a wonderful experience for them. And I had to humbly admit that I'd actually never had a Jesuit retreat. I actually approached it as a head thing. Meanwhile, my wife, who's here, went on a 40-day retreat and actually knew what it meant. And so that divide between the affective and the experiential and the cerebral and the theoretical is a particular vulnerability for professional academics, but it's true of all of us, isn't it? That we can get it in the head, but it takes much more to get it into the body. But I think maybe there is some hope for me, and the Synod experience here was enormously helpful in this, because it reminded me of a very brief moment while covering the Synod for Paulus Press in New York. I found myself at one point just outside the Holy Office, not the best place you want to have a conversation around this topic, but anyway, just outside the Holy Office, with a young woman and a deacon, a permanent deacon from Belgium. And he said, I want you to listen to what she has to say. And I steeled myself for it and thinking, okay, I'm going to be talking right through this. No, I'm actually going to try and do this properly. And I listened to her. And I changed my mind. That kind of experience, it seems to me, is illustrative of what a synodal church is. It's the injection of an element of humility, the recognition that we don't have the full truth, the acknowledgement that through dialogue and encounter, we continue to be learning subjects. That's been my experience here. I never doubted Cathy Pete's commitment to the fact that it was going to be realized. If you've ever worked with Cathy Pete, it's going to happen. And it did happen. What I was concerned about was the role that I was going to play as a learner. And I wasn't surprised. I wasn't doing it very well. But I think over the course of a couple of days that all of us have been here, we've undergone some element of that conversion that Greg Kennedy talked about. The ability actually to attend to the other. Not as an adversary, but as an interlocutor. Somebody who, and Cathy Clifford reminded us of this, in the end it's not the credentials of the office of the ministry, it's the common baptism that we share. So, these few days that we've been together here synodally will affect all of us, not only in the ways we think, but hopefully, and this certainly is my personal resolve, in the way that we act. Thank you for that.
So I think we should just thank these people because they have been so important to this process, giving excellent advice from a number of different places and have worked for a long time helping this event be grounded and wise and integrated. And so little applause for everybody. So now I'm going to invite Joe Gunn up to talk about what's next.
So the organizers really got it wrong. Who heard throughout these couple of days the words todos, todos, todos? I think I'm the only one in the steering committee that spent time in Latin America and speaks Spanish. They said, Joe, go ahead up there and do to-dos, to-dos, to-dos. So in just a few moments with 12 slides, we're going to present not what we have to do, but options for moving forward, okay? So there are some slides. I hope people can see them. It's easier than listening to me. But a great way to start any of your conversations about synodality is to use the kind of logo that you might have seen or might not have seen for what the synod represents. Notice who's leading, notice who's involved, notice the different colors, the different shapes, ages, sizes. It's a great way to begin a conversation about inclusion and what we hope to do. So today we'll talk about some possibilities and what we know so far about the next steps. So there is also another kind of graph that might help you. Over on the left is kind of 2021, when Francis announced what the synod would be, and then the consultation process that went from our parishes to our diocese to, in Canada, 4 regions of bishops presenting reports, to then a national phase, and then a continental phase. There were 7 meetings of continents around the world, and then the lead up to October 23rd, that first synod, and then the second one, October 2024. Much less consultation in the second one, I must say. But sometimes this kind of a graph is helpful when you're explaining to a group that might not know the process to date. It might be a helpful thing to use. We're now in that last part out there. You notice the synod 21 to 2024. Well, we're actually in 2025. This is what is called the implementation phase. And who's supposed to do it? Well, the documents from the synod talk about the members of the assembly, so people that were there, and weren't there about close to 14 from Canada, I think. They have a role. And then local churches. And everyone is mentioned there. We're even talking about social movements in the church, beyond our parishes and so on, groupings of people journeying together. And of course then we have Episcopal conferences and synods of churches could happen. And there is a synod secretariat, which Francis wanted to create, which is, I think, almost permanent in Rome. So that exists now to guide us. So we'll talk a little bit about what they're going to do too. There are next steps in this implementation phase that we're talking about. So this was amazing. I think someone mentioned, maybe it was Monsignor last night. You know, Francis is kind of on his deathbed in the hospital, right? He calls down Cardinal Grech, the Maltese cardinal who's head of the Synod Secretariat, and he says, they signed this letter of what has to happen in the next steps. And so it's kind of outlined in this mid-March note from Francis, and they'll put those up here and share some of these ideas, which I can barely read from here. But you know, it's talking about how the existing team should go forward for those places that maybe were idle or something. They suggested that here's a chance for them to kind of catch up. Dioceses that have invested less in the synodal path, isn't that a nice way of saying have an opportunity to recover the steps not yet taken and to form their own synodal teams. This is your big chance, right? And then the journey that will lead the whole church to the celebration of the ecclesial December in October 2028. So you heard that the process, according to Francis, and his orders to, or his invitation to Cardinal Grech, is to lead this so that we have another synod taking place in Rome in October of 2028. Now, Francis wanted, in this same letter, in May, that's last month, by the way, we were supposed to get a support document from the Synod on the Secretariat that would outline some guidelines for going forward. Now, how many of you are educators? Okay, so what do you do to students that hand in papers? I asked a very kind but very intelligent person who was a longtime educator, this fellow by the name of Gary Warner. At breakfast yesterday, said, you were an associate dean, you were the hammer, like, what do you do to people that get stuff in late? He says, well, Joe, you kind of wait and move with the way things are. You check out the situation, it depends who they are. So, we didn't get in May, but I'm sure Cardinal Gretsch is working on that. And we heard Bishop Elaine say last night that there's going to be a meeting with the news and the local council. So we'll see. There is between June of 2025 and December of 26, this is the implementation stage in dioceses, local churches, and their groupings. We'll hear what that means. The end of June, did you know that Francis established after the first synod and towards the others, 10 study groups on important themes with long names that nobody understood. But some of those study groups are doing really, really important work. So for my many sins, I got appointed to one, which is called the Cry of the Poor. We immediately changed it to the Cry of the Poor in the Earth, and it's a wild thing. You know, we have these meetings where I'm on at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the chair is a lay woman who's 12 o'clock midnight in Sydney, Australia. Somebody's in Kinshasa, someone's in Manila, somebody's in Lima, Peru, and sometimes we've even missed a meeting because the chair fell asleep. But we're moving on it. And those groups were supposed to report by the end of June, and you get information about where these things are happening. Hold on, we'll get back to this. In October, the Jubilee, it's a year after the last synod, so there could be celebrations for that. By the time we get into 2027, you can have an evaluation assembly in different dioceses about how your implementation has gone. And then, by the time we get into the second half of 2027, these evaluation assemblies will begin to prepare actually for the 2028 synod. So there'll be these various meetings. There'll be publication of what's called a working document or an instrumentum laboris for the next synod. So Francis and the Cardinal laid out an entire plan for the next part of synodality. That's the Spirit is speaking. All right, thanks. So then, of course, a lot of people have been asking, well, what about this new Robert Prevost, this fellow that he's kind of come into? Well, the good news is, as was mentioned last night, he was at both synods. He played a role as the cardinal responsible for the dicastery that chose bishops. And so there are 2 of those 10 study groups of which he is a member looking at the role of bishops. So he was involved, that's good news. Kind of the bad news is, does he like the White Sox or does he like the Cubs? We have to ask canon lawyer Father John, who's here from Illinois, and might be able to tell us, but everybody's trying to figure out, well, what is Leo going to think about the synod? Well, he actually referred to continuing the synod in his first words when he was elected. So I think we could assume we're going forward there. There were some things that we need to move forward on. And these were remarks that came out of the final document, which you can work with in any group of people. We, of course, there are some pieces that were much less than what we might have wanted in the final document that relate to some of the issues that we're talking about. One small mention of LGBTQ, just as one example. Also, the question of women in the church. Some of those things passed on to a study group. The good news is that what comes from the Spirit cannot be stopped. So use those 2 particular issues which seem to come up all the time in our Canadian context But I want to go quickly to say that as of last week, we got a surprise. You will remember the study groups were supposed to be finished at the end of June, and we get all these reports. Well, my wife laid out my bikini, she thought, it's time for summer. We're finished the job, but this is Cardinal Gretsch, and he said, no. So the new study group, the 10 study groups can now report until actually the end of October, which means we have to keep working. And if they find that it's a little bit tough to meet the deadlines, they could even report as late as the end of this year. So more work for all of us, and those things, I think people would be looking for the study groups to report maybe a little earlier. So, where is the Spirit inviting you to participate? That's the question before us. There is a bit of an outline of what will happen, and as Bishop Elaine said, we'll likely hear more after he meets in Rome next week. So we don't know all the details, but we have some indication. We need to look at where we can participate as laity in our parishes. Let's have the conversations go forward in our diocese. There is nothing on the website of the CCCB yet about that, what's going forward, but we heard Bishop Elaine say he's trying to bring some of these issues forward. So let's be bold, as was suggested. Let's bring the interest of this meeting and of lay people forward as we go on.